All right, thanks everyone for being here. I hope you didn't miss lunch. I'm sorry I'm a bit late. So my name is Crystal Farmer, and that's me. I'm a Social Anthropology Master student, and I'm studying game developers. So I'm going to start with an explanation of what social anthropology is, and the methods that we use, and then I'm going to tell you the story of how I gathered my findings, and the things that I got horribly, horribly, horribly wrong. Okay, so I'm finding it extremely intimidating talking here because so far I've only presented to people who are anthropologists and I need to explain everything to them. But I kind of feel like, who the hell am I to tell you guys what you guys are like? So I'm not going to talk at you, and my biggest challenge will be to tell you something that you don't already know. I'm not sure what you'll get out of this, but I don't think it will help you make better games, but I hope that it will help you by giving you insight on how the industry is viewed by outsiders and how we appreciate your creative and emotional labor. And maybe you can draw some insights about aspects of your culture that you might take for granted. Okay, but first, to illustrate the insider-outsiderness, we're going to play a bit of a word association game. So I'm going to say a word, and then when I point at you, I want you to shout the first thing that comes to mind, okay? So the first thing I'm going to say is breakfast. Okay, cool, that was an easy one. Next one, game jam. Unity. Platformer. Okay, so a lot of the words that you use speaks to the kind of vernacular that people who know about games will use. But me as an outsider would have said something else. So I'll use my friend Mila, my hostess and Books Live editor. And she said the following. For breakfast, she said neutro. For game jam, she said gamers having a jaw. For Ubuntu, for Unity, she said school motto. And for platformer, she said someone performing on a stage. So that just shows the disparity between being an insider and the type of language you understand and being an outsider and how you assume things or might not understand a particular language. So I'm first going to talk to you about my academic discipline. And this is the first picture that comes up on Google image search when you search social anthropologist, and I hate it. I hate everything about it. It is just crap, but that is kind of speaks to the history of what social anthropology is all about. So anthropologists would travel to far-off distant places and study tribes and people in groups, and they'd immerse themselves in these cultures that are unfamiliar to them. And they'd learn the language, they'd take part in rituals, they'd map kinship structures, and this method is called participant observation. And if you heard Adene's talk earlier on today, you'll know everything there is about participant observation. Okay, so these findings are compiled in text called ethnographies, or at least in the type of anthropology that I do. And ethnographies are basically really elaborate novels with very thick descriptions about the everyday, mundane things, and you kind of make theories and link to existing theories, and you just try to make as many connections as you possibly can. So anthropologists today, or at least me, I use this sort of immersion to better understand my more immediate environment. So I don't necessarily travel far, but I study people who are around me. And so through immersion, we use these very small, detailed case studies to understand larger social phenomena and social issues. So we use both quantitative and qualitative data, and we focus mostly on qualitative. So we like a good life story, we like a good narrative. So in the same way, I entered the field as a complete stranger, and I had to learn the language and rituals of the game developers. So as we can see from the word association game, I was like Mila, I knew nothing about the game dev world. And I'm going to quote some of my initial field notes from my field note diary that I took when I started in the field. So you can get a sense of where I was at emotionally and thinking-wise. First one, I think this is either culture shock or my general awkwardness. Another one, new languages, experiences, and practices. It's like a tribe. Another one is, where do I put my dirty plate? Am I being observed? Probably, even though I feel invisible, but that's also good. So many high fives. And then this particular one. And then I told him about my research, and he said, prepare to be extremely underwhelmed. And then, okay, so that's about it. So when you go into the field as a researcher, your body becomes the research tool. So this is my body. It's not the standard body that you'd find in the game dev culture community. And I'll let you decide for yourselves what about my body is different. But this is my research tool. So contained within this body, within this research tool, are my own life experiences, my own subjectivities, and my own assumptions and expectations. And as you can tell by now, anthropology isn't really a very sciencey science, and that's why we need as much detail as possible. I need to convince my readers, the readers who read my ethnographies, that I was there in the field, and I need to be reflexive. And this means that I have to be honest about my subjectivity in my writing. I have to acknowledge my subjectivity, and at the same time, I have to try and be objective. Okay, so, this is a very convoluted metaphor, but please bear with. Okay, so what I'm wearing on my feet now are my outsider socks. These are the socks that I came into the field with. And I started wearing only these socks when I started my research, but as I immersed myself by general loitering, by attending events, and by volunteering, I slowly began putting on my insider sock. Okay. So, Master gave Dobby a sock. Okay, so I slowly started walking around in the field wearing my socks, and I sort of started to look like I belonged. I'm sort of starting to resemble somebody in the field who sort of belongs. And I still need to wear my outsider sock because I need to maintain that objectivity. But the more I wear my insider sock, the more it forms to my foot, the more it starts becoming part of who I am. So I'm going to quote from my notes again, my field notes, and it's this bit. How do I adapt my personality to my new transformed self in the space that I'm studying? Okay, so let me take you to my first ever game jam. It was on the 4th of June, 2016. And it seems ludicrous now, but I knew absolutely nobody. And I was the only woman there, and I didn't bring a computer with me because I didn't know what the hell was going on. So again, I'm going to read from my field notes. So I come into this game jam at the Bandwidth Barn and sort of wander into an empty chair. I've hardly sat down when a bespectacled face looks up at me and says, "Hi, I'm Stephen." Stephen tells me about Make Games South Africa and the logo he designed and how game developers are his family. This is encouraging. He asks me if I have a computer with me, and I say no, so he sends me away to make a board game. I feel like the naughty kid who forgot their pencil case. The theme of this game jam is visualize. So what also struck me about that particular game jam was is Ben here? Yeah, Ben Rash. So he came there just for years. He couldn't attend the whole game jam, but he said, it's better than being alone at home. I'd rather be here for a short while. And then he let me play Wrestling with Emotions. It was sort of like testy sort of phase, and that was the first ever indie game that I ever played, and it was absolutely amazing. So I never did make that board game, and I fled the scene out of sheer awkwardness because I couldn't handle it. So I just thought to myself, how can I be a participant observer if I can't even participate by making games? That's ridiculous. And so sheepishly the next day I went to Free Lies where Stephen and Sugar were staying, and I asked them to show me what they'd made the day before. So Sugar showed me this amazing visualizer that you play music and these beautiful forms come, and Evan and Stephen showed me theirs as well. And I just thought, it just felt like magic to me because yesterday there was nothing and today there's something. So someone called me a groupie of game devs, which is kind of fair, I suppose, and you know who you are. But I think we can scrap that label now because I made a thing. Does anyone want to play it? It's really quick. It's 30 seconds. It's really shitty. Do you want to try? Okay. Well, actually, you look really... Richard, you can come play it. Okay, so it's a game about my little chihuahua, Clanky. And she really likes eating snails. And she likes to dig in flower pots. Okay. So, Richard, it's just arrows left and right. And jump is that. And you've got to try to eat the snails.
Jump is what?
Oh, shit. Sorry. Let me just quickly find it. I made it in Construct 2. It's really bad.
Which one is for you?
Left and right arrows. And then... Oh, hang on. Oh, yes. You guys were making history, Crystal's first game. Okay. But this happened like more than a year later. I actually only made that this week. Okay. Wait, let me start from the beginning. Okay. And jump. So you've got to jump onto the platforms. Up. Yeah. So you've got to eat snails before they disappear. Okay, that's the end of the game. She gets run over by a car. Thank you. Thanks for playing, Richard. So my game is also a little bit broken. It wasn't supposed to end like that. It's supposed to be like her dying with lots of blood coming out of her mouth. But that game was actually about how she got run over by a car, and then she actually survived, and that blood was just her biting her tongue. And she survived because I gave her mouth to mouth, and then... And then I sort of nursed her back to health. She was paralyzed for 2 weeks, and I had to literally squish the poop out of her body and feed her with a syringe and stuff. Anyways, but she's fine now, and she's fat and happy and lively and has full function. Okay, so that was my first game. Very, very difficult, because I'm not technologically inclined, but it was actually easier than I thought. So, okay. So with my research, I got some things wrong about the industry, and I got some things right. And so I'm going to share a few bits from my proposal that I wrote before I came into the field. So I knew very little. And I'd like you to go, if you agree, and bzzz if you disagree. Okay, so the first one is, an indie game dev team is responsible for all aspects of development, including their art, music, programming, conceptual design, and marketing. Because of this intimate involvement with the game as a whole, there is a vulnerability and emotional investment that the developers make towards the game. Agree or disagree? Okay. The second one. The city needs to be attractive to and tolerant of creatives who will hopefully bring new and innovative business to the city's economy. Agree or disagree? Okay, next one. Local indie game culture is not limited to South Africa and is subject to feedback and influence from a global community. Okay, and the second last one. Indie game design in Cape Town provides a medium through which to gain an understanding of flexible and often precarious forms of employment. That's my academic pompousness there. It also exposes the tensions between authentic creative expression and making a living, and between being original and being part of a community, all which arise from modern-day capitalism and the employment opportunities specific to South Africa. Agree or disagree? Okay, and the last one. The game dev community is cohesive and inclusive, and the industry could not exist without it. There you go. So, as you can see, traditionally, anthropologists would study remote places, so they'd often have like a top-down kind of study. And that's what I hate about anthropology. So in this research, the people I'm studying, you guys, are my social and intellectual equals in a way. And most of you are way cleverer and more philosophical than I am. So I see you all as my co-theorists in the writing of my thesis. So let's go a bit deeper into my methodology. I knew almost nothing about the industry, and I only started studying games because I did a focus group with an old flame and his gamer buddies, and I found out that there's so much richness and complexity contained within this world of games. And I just saw it as this flat, homogeneous things. And I wanted to study something that was more tech-inclined, and I thought it would be an interesting lens through which to understand social, economic, and political issues that anthropologists normally investigate. So during field work, you need to build yourself a network. And going to a game jam was very difficult for me because I can't talk to strangers. It's really hard, and that's made my research extremely slow. So I started with Richard, and he's my BFS BFF. And through him and Free Lives, I was able to get my socks in the door. I acted as Dimpo's minion for about a month, and I offered everyone a lift because in my car, that's the only way I can tear everyone away from their computers, and then you're kind of a captive audience. I can ask you questions. So I volunteered at EGE, and I attended game jams as a casual observer. And then when I shed my Free Lives training wheels, I got involved with some of Regina's endeavors with 67 games. And I took part in the Serious About Games competition, where I found out how difficult it is to explain to people what your game idea is. So it was mostly just me and my group showing how amazing my friend Tessa Vessel's art is. So that was very hard. But then eventually I started taking part in Super Friendship Arcade activities and became part of the core organizing committee. And that's by far the most enriching experience I've had so far. So I've made friends, but as Stephen said, I also made a family. When looking at my ill-informed research proposal, I can see that I'm far away from being where I was when I started. And I've definitely changed. And it's made it harder for myself to call It's made it harder for me to call myself out on my subjectivity. Because at this stage, I'm not just having one insider sock, it's two insider socks, and it's getting a little bit too native, as they say in the anthropological world. You go native. Yeah. So it becomes harder to look at the more uncomfortable topics when you're more of an insider. And so I have to peel off my insider sock so that I can have clarity of thought. So I'm going to peel off my insider sock. Hope I'm not flashing. Okay, there. Got to throw it out, and then I've got to look at my findings. So here are some of my findings. Number one, the community, while tight, is fraught with all sorts of family-style tensions. I was under the impression at first that game developers were a tight group until I met one in real life who said, I avoid online communities like the plague, and they're very toxic. I didn't even consider who was not engaging in the communities and how they go about their business. In fact, until yesterday, I didn't even ask myself, who isn't at a maze? How many chairs are empty at all the different talks? There's a notion of gatekeeping, I think, and any community is still someone's community. At the inception of the game industry in South Africa, the community was tiny and needed to be tight and supportive. And wonderful things happen. But perhaps as growth occurs, the scene becomes more heterogeneous, and we're moving towards communities plural. So these different communities may or may not be in conflict with each other. So it's indeed like a family, but it's an extended family. There are nuclear families, there are aunts and uncles, there are cousins, there are siblings that grew up and left home, and there's a weird uncle that only shows up at weddings. Okay, so that's the funnies about community, and I think, you can all elaborate on that for yourselves. The next one is the game developer's physical body. And this is really important for a number of reasons. And I always saw games as this ethereal, virtual thing that isn't grounded in physical space, but I realized that the body of the game developer is key. It comes up thematically in a lot of my investigations. So first, what you look like, how you choose to present yourself, and how your body is perceived by others, it's a key theme that crops up a lot. And this is linked to identity politics. So this might refer to sexuality, gender, or race, and we all know that these are big issues, and we could spend an entire day talking about this. And then the second aspect of the body is the general physical and mental health of the game developer. This sometimes falls by the wayside. And we joke that game developers are all really pasty and indoorsy, but I think I've seen a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, a lot of overworked bodies. And unusual work hours are normalized. And as an outsider, this is hard to observe, but as an insider, it actually triggers my empathetic bone, and it really makes me feel powerless and sad to see all of that. But also, I don't know, I just love that there's such a human aspect to it, which I didn't see before, and it's so stupid that I didn't see it, but obviously a human makes the games. And then the last thing is, my father lectures maths at a Technikon in Cape Town, and he said one of his students came up to him and said, oh, I need to talk to you. And he said, oh, about what? He said, no, I can't tell you over the phone. I'm going to come see you. And then it turns out that this guy had made a game, but he didn't know what to do with it, and he wanted to play it himself and share it with friends, but he was scared that other people would steal his idea if he asked for help. And, this game is finished, and it's made, and he made it all by himself, but where to from there? And how can we as a game community find these people? And should we find these people? Do we have some sort of moral obligation to people like that? And I wouldn't call them marginalized because they are central to their own experience of making games. So where do I step in with my insider sock in this case? And where do I trade with my outsider sock? So I point you towards Dimpo's talk later, or next, about the missing middle, which I think is going to be absolutely important. So in closing, I can unequivocally say that pre-fieldwork Crystal is completely different to present-day Crystal, and for the better. inside a sock is now a staple in my wardrobe. And I thank everyone who has so generously shared their experience and their everydays with me. My research isn't over, it's far from over, and I'm very keen to learn more and to be proven wrong. So if you're interested in talking to me about some ideas you might have, about directions you think I should go in, your stories, or you want to posit a few theories, Dorian gave me a really cool theory during the break now, then please contact me. That's my email, and you can contact my body. I'm here at Amaze. And finally, I just want to say a special thank you to Richard, Dimple, Ben Rausch, Ben Myers, Stephen, Robbie, Regina, Free Lives, and Make Games SA for challenging me and humbling me and for knocking my socks off. Thank you so much.